we begin our new study this morning on faith and taking a deeper look at it, and with the hopes of developing a stronger, deeper faith that allows us to go far beyond maybe what we ever thought was possible in our spiritual walk. But as with any study of this nature, we have to begin with understanding what is faith. And traditionally, we would look to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 as Christians for a definition of what faith is. And we're going to look at it this morning. But we give this quote of this passage, but do we really understand what that definition says about the subject of faith? Sometimes I'm afraid that it leaves us with more questions, more misunderstandings than maybe what it answers for us. And a lot of times we're too timid, we're too scared, we're too something to admit that or ask more about it. And so we go through life with just this sort of vaguest of understanding of what faith is, and therefore everybody else gets to define what faith is and whether we have it or not. So let's start by looking at Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1, because faith is such a vital part of our spiritual walk. It's such a key component of our salvation that we need to understand it. We need to be able to embrace it and grow it. So Hebrews chapter 11, beginning verse 1. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see. Okay, what? Again, it's this great sounding definition, and once you understand it, it is a good definition. But what does that really mean? Well, let's break this down and begin with the components of this definition and really see if we can dial in our understanding of faith. So confidence, or faith, is confidence in what we hope for. Now, confidence is defined as the feeling or a belief that one can rely on someone or something. Firm trust. Okay? Feeling or the belief that I can rely on something or someone. So the Hebrew writer is saying that faith is the ability to trust in, and the something or someone in this case, he defines as being that which we hope for. So my faith is the ability to trust what I'm hoping for, that exists, that can happen, that it can be reality or is reality. So what is it that we hope for? Well, when we're talking about spiritual matters, because this terminology of faith and hope and all that could apply to so many other things in life besides just spiritual matters, but when we are talking about spiritual matters, this begins at the most basic level, and it builds from there. I hope God exists. Faith is trusting that he does. I hope Jesus is the Son of God and that he died for my sins. Faith is trusting that he is and that he did. I hope that I can have forgiveness of sins and eternal life. Faith is trusting that I do through Jesus and his directions. And it just continues to build and build and build and build. More of what God is, more of what God can do, more of what I hope that he can accomplish in my life, more of what I believe he can and will accomplish. That's just part of our definition. That is the beginning part. Now, faith is the confidence in what we hope for and the assurance about what we do not see. So what is it that gives me confidence? In order for me to have confidence, there's got to be something that builds that level of belief, that builds that level of trust. Why should I trust those things? I hope that God exists. Why should I believe that? How can I be certain about those? I can't see those things that I listed off. I can't touch them. So how do I find confidence in them in order to have faith in them? Sometimes we look at this passage in Hebrews 11:1, and we think that the second half of this passage just means that I have to just accept things even though they're unseen. That I've got to have some sort of a blind faith. I can never see it. I can never touch it, but I've just got to believe it. That's not what the Hebrew writer is saying. You see, faith is the accumulation or the result of the accumulation of assurances, statements that are given to confirm or to convince that something or someone can be trusted. In other words, the thing we are hoping for may be unseen in and of itself. It may be unseen for the moment. It may be something that is still in the future waiting to be seen. But it does mean that there are not visible statements, that there are not visible things that are being provided to us to assure us that the unseen is really there. These items, when added together, provide us with confidence. In a court case, these might be called circumstantial evidence, and directly they are not proof, and on their own they're not proof. But when added together and combined, they provide enough evidence to convince a person of something. All of the things that surround us, that speak of God, that testify of his existence, individually may or may not convince somebody that he exists. But when you start adding them together, there becomes far too many for something to just be a coincidence. It becomes a pattern. It becomes a complete testimony that God is there, that God's real, that God is powerful, that God is loving, that God is caring, that God is involved and interactive in our lives. And so that's what the Hebrew writer is talking about. I can have faith because I have confidence in what I'm hoping for based on the assurance of all the little pieces of evidence that I can see that add up to tell me that what I can't see is real. This is the part that affects our level of faith. our ability to see the surrounding evidence that doesn't exist. The understanding of how that evidence fits together and works together to prove a greater point determines how strong our faith is. It also determines whether our faith will stand up under pressure. If I'm not very confident, if I'm not very certain, if I'm not very convinced of the evidence, then when push comes to shove, my faith falls. The more I am confident in the evidence, the more that I am secure in the belief that it tells me what is real, the stronger my faith, the stronger my ability to face up to the challenges. Many times we struggle to see the evidence that God is laying out on the table before us. And the problem is not that it can't be seen, it's that it's unseen by me, for whatever reason that is. He's not hiding it. He's not trying to deceive us. Just for whatever reason, I am not paying attention. I'm not aware. I'm not putting the pieces together. Whatever the struggle is, and we've got to learn to overcome that. And that's part of what we're going to try to accomplish through the course of this series. So let's talk about levels of faith. You might say, well, isn't faith faith? No. I've just said that based on our confidence, our faith is stronger or weaker. Throughout the life of Jesus, as we look at it through the gospel accounts, we see his interactions with individuals as healing takes place, as teaching takes place. And as we get deeper into the study, we're going to take a look at many of these and do some case studies and go into some deeper details of those individual accounts so we can learn from their faith. Today, we're simply going to look at these passages quickly, or part of these passages quickly, to see that these different levels of faith existed. Later, we'll see how that affects us and how our spiritual walk is determined by our level of faith. We begin Matthew chapter 8. Here in this chapter, we see two different levels of faith. Verse 10, Matthew chapter 8, we find the conclusion of the story of the centurion who asked Jesus to come and heal his servant, and Jesus was going to go to his house with him, and the centurion said, no, I'm not worthy to have you come to my house, but I know authority. I'm a man of authority, and when I tell somebody to go do something, they go do it. You, Jesus, are a person of authority. All you've got to do is speak it from here, and it will be done. Matthew chapter 8, verse 10, when Jesus heard this, he was amazed and said to those who follow him, truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. Now, it needs to be said, this great faith, in this case, is comparable to other people. And for the most part, we're not going to try, don't need to try to worry about comparing our level of faith to someone else to make our level greater or lesser. We just need a healthy understanding. Where is my level of faith? On the scope of faith. And how do I work to improve that? Dropping down, we'll look at verse 26. This is the case of the disciples as they've gotten into the boat with Jesus. Jesus has gone down in the front of the boat. He's gone to sleep. And the storm comes up. And they're rowing and they're battening down the sails and bailing the boat, scared to death. They're about to drown. And they wake Jesus up, and don't you care that we're about to die? Verse 26, he replied, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? He got up and rebuked the wind and the waves, and it was completely calm. This is the disciples. These are the ones who had the faith to step out when Jesus called them and leave everything behind and to go with him. You have little faith. Matthew chapter 13, verse 54, Jesus comes back to his hometown and he begins teaching the people in the synagogues. And they were amazed. And they asked, where did he get these miraculous powers? And the passage goes on to say that Jesus was not able to perform very many miracles there because of their lack of faith. So there are levels of faith. Why does that matter? Well, like the examples that we will study in greater detail, our level of faith plays a role in our salvation. It also plays a role in how God chooses to work in our lives and how he chooses to work through us in our lives. Matthew chapter 17, verse 20. Jesus, in dealing with his disciples after they have failed to drive out a demon, makes this statement. Because you have so little faith. This is the answer to their question, why couldn't we drive it out? Because you have so little faith. Truly, I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. Jesus says, you failed because your faith was small. Now, as we talk about this passage about the mustard seed, we usually talk about how it's the smallest of seeds, how tiny this is. And yet Jesus uses it to say, if your faith is this big. See, we look at this passage, we say if our faith is this small, we can do this. Jesus said, if your faith is this big, you can do this. That's good news. Because my faith doesn't have to be that big to be saving faith. We're going to look at that and study that and figure out what does it mean to have saving faith. But there are people who think, I've got to develop this great faith. I've got to get my life in order that my faith has to move me to accomplish these things before I can be saved. No. I don't have to have faith as big as a mustard seed to be saved. Mustard seed is mountain moving faith. And it's not the biggest faith. It's just how big Jesus says you got to get to this point before you can do this. Imagine if you develop beyond that, what you will be able to do in the cause of Christ. But it begins with saving faith. And we learn how to crawl. We learn how to drink the milk of the Word. And we grow. Until we get to faith as a mustard seed and beyond. That's what we're going to be studying. That is the core basis of faith and what it is and why we need it. So starting next week, we look at how do I get it? How much do I have to have? How do I build it? How do I get to where I can move mountains? The lesson's yours.